I grew up in a Methodist parsonage, and I often say that that was a great preparation for politics. Being a member of the preacher's family, we knew people, and if there was something wrong and they were hurting, we knew we had to do something about it. And I married Edward Fadeley, whom we met as teenagers, and we drove out to Oregon. It was his idea, but I didn't question it at all, and boy, was it a good idea. The first week we were here, we did attend a Democratic event where Richard Neuberger was talking about those dams on the river, and they invited us for breakfast the next morning. I mean, and it was so, we were involved from the first. Ed was elected to the Oregon House of Representatives when he was relatively young, and I was his assistant. But you know, it wasn't long before I started looking around and thought, you know, I can do as well as they are. So I was campaigning from sea level to ski level, and I loved it. People weren't as partisan as they were today. I entered the legislature knowing that field burning was something on these people's minds. The field burning developed as a way to sanitize the fields, the grass seed fields. And it was very important on land that wasn't really particularly productive otherwise. And sometimes it was difficult to see because of the field burning. One time when we were holding a hearing in Eugene, Bill Bowerman and Steve Fontaine came to testify. And their testimony was, look, we're healthy, we're athletes, you know, but when that smoke comes in, it takes it out of us. And then the turning point was when there was the wreck where people were killed because of the smoke. That did make a number of people think about maybe we ought to do something about this. Serving as Ed's assistant, that was 10 years of experience in the Capitol. And I learned a lot, including where the bodies were buried, so that when I entered the legislature, the Speaker of the House was a Republican, Bob Smith, who didn't have any reason to do me any favors, but he gave me very good committee assignments. And I think that was because he knew that the work had to be done, and he knew that I knew something about how to do it. There are some committees that are friendly in certain ways and others that are friendly in other ways, and it's where the real work is done. The lovability and livability of Oregon, that's a phrase of Tom McCall's, is made possible, I think, by Senate Bill 100. There had been work done before preparing for it, so I knew it was coming, which is the reason I asked for it. On election night in 1972, when it became apparent that the Democrats were going to control the House, I called Dick Eyman, because I realized that he would be the Speaker of the House, and I said to him, I want to be chairman of the Environment Committee. And he says, okay. And I want you to call it the Environment and Land Use Committee. Okay, because I want to make sure I got that bill. Well, the bottle bill, of course, is Oregon's most famous legislation. For years after that, and it's still going on, there were attempts to sabotage it. And those bills to sabotage it were all sent to my committee, where they received their just reward. I really feel as if much I was able to do in the legislature had to do with my ability to write articles that drew attention to things. I wrote for Ranger Rick the National Wildlife publication for children. And I described what happened, how kids came to the legislature they thought it was a good idea to have a bottle bill. At the end of the thing, it says, well, that's the Oregon bottle bill story. Do you know whether your state legislature is thinking about passing a bottle bill? Why don't you write your state senators and representatives and find out? Well, in 1973 was the first time there was very many women in the legislature. And the nature of a woman who would run for the legislature at that time was usually somebody who was rather progressive, because that isn't something that a woman would do. So we had a lot in common. 1973 was a time when all over the country there was a push for an equal rights amendment. And state after state ratified the Equal Rights Amendment. Representative Drew Davis put in a measure to repeal our ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. And I didn't really take it very seriously. But then, at that time, I happened to be in Washington, D.C., and I was listening to the radio, and I heard somebody saying that, those states that ratified the Equal Rights Amendment, they understand what a mistake they made, and they're repealing it. And in Oregon, they're just about to repeal their ratification. Well, let me tell you, I returned to Oregon a very, very determined person to do something about us. I mean, I knew we were going to do it, but we certainly weren't going to have other states thinking that this was the thing that should be done. And I said, I think we ought to put in legislation that reaffirms our ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. I don't think it was generally known that I was going to put in an amendment because that came as a real surprise to many people. And so I put in an amendment. We substituted the word reaffirm for repeal. And that passed very, very well. The Displaced Homemaker movement in the Older Women's League, that came from the brilliant minds of two very smart women, Tish Summers and Laurie Shields. Tish and Laurie were talking one day about what happens as you grow older. Tish said, you know what? We're just a couple of displaced homemakers. And that was the time when displaced workers was the phrase. And so I put in legislation appropriating money for programs for women who had been a long time out of the workforce after a life of family and raising children. And it also made an incredible difference in my life, because I saw what happened as women grew older. And so I had deferred comp taken out of my salary. I don't have to worry about finances the way so many other women do. Out of the Displaced Homemaker movement came the Older Women's League. Tish's idea was that the Older Women's League would have local chapters so that people could get together for support and for advocating. Our three big issues were health, poverty, and caregiving. I don't remember anything any attention given to caregiving before the Older Women's League. It was something that was done in silence, in isolation. It was not appreciated. And now it is. I lost my first legislative race when Reagan was elected. I'm not sure I could get elected now because It just doesn't seem like the same scene. I was very fortunate. It was a wonderful time to be in Oregon. The environmental movement was new. The Earth Day was new. President Nixon signed the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. I mean, that's not anything that you would expect a Republican president to do, especially one like Nixon. And things could get done. And if you look in the Oregon Blue Book, and they talk about Oregon first and what people know about Oregon legislation, most of it happened in those early 70s. And most of it came out of my committee, and I just treasure those thoughts.